This is
Make It Plain.
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make It Plain.
Get woke.
Everyone, as we take a look at the tragic anniversary of the Buffalo shooting, what is going on when it comes to domestic terrorism? And isn't that becoming more of an issue than ever before? We're happy to have with us from the oldest, the boldest, the most most discussed civil rights organization, of which I am a faithful member, the NAACP. She's the director of Opportunity, Race, and Justice. Keisha Dana Ryan joins us on Make It Plain. Keisha, how are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Reverend Mark. I am great today, so thank you.
It's an honor to have you. So first of all, your thoughts and NAACP's thoughts and reflections on 1 year since Buffalo.
So this is a situation that's impacting America and also Black America specifically across our nation. And it's because there's two things involved. One, we have a direct target, Black and brown people have a direct target on their back for domestic terrorism. It has been ongoing and longstanding since the history and the foundation of this country, whether it comes from slavery to mass incarceration to the new Jim Crow, lynchings, school to prison pipeline systems. There's been a long-standing target and aim on the backs of Black and brown people. Domestic terrorism has been growing, and one, because we don't have the correct policies in place around police and FBI taking these types of things accountable and holding accountable hate crimes. In addition to when we look at gun control across our country and the mobilization of how guns are easily accessible and used across our nation to kill people, it's an ongoing issue. So there's multiple complex layers that go into domestic terrorism, but it is on the rise.
And I guess, too, sometimes people categorize certain things as terrorism and other things just fall into the category of mass shootings. But we're seeing really more and more every day of an overlap and an intersection, aren't we?
And I'll give you a little bit of a definition. So that's a really great point. When we think about mass shootings and we think about what domestic terrorism stands for. And so by the definition of domestic terrorism, it is a terrorist act in a perpetrator's own country against fellow citizens, right? So when we think about hate, we think about targeted hate agenda. When we think about someone specifically race profiling, gender profiling, or even from a LGBTQ plus profiling, that is what's considered domestic terrorism. So we have a historic, specifically in the most recent cases of people attending, grocery stores, but Black people being targeted in those grocery stores and being murdered. When we think about Black churches, folks coming into those Black churches, targeting Black churches, and then causing harm and or crime and hurt and pain. And also in domestic terrorism, people also assume that it is just gun violence. It is not. Domestic terrorism can come in the form of acts of verbal abuse. It could come in the form of conversations around the ways that we target and racially profile when it comes to physical abuse. And then, of course, in the worst case, when it comes to gun violence. And so that's really the definition of domestic terrorism. It's a targeted act of hate and crime. And so we see an escalation of that. And we look at that also from our Asian, our AAPI, our Asian and Pacific Islander folks and how they are also being targeted. So hate crimes are on the rise because there is in my opinion, Reverend Mark, to speak openly, there is a white supremacist conversation about white hierarchy and power in this country. And of course, you being an expert on that, we know that that's not going away. And as the fear and as that guilt continues to rise in Black and, in white America against Black America, that's where a lot of the hate crimes are targeted. It's because of this white supremacy culture we continue to allow to perpetuate in our country.
Now, I want to note something you said, though, that it sounds like you, if I heard it all correctly in the actual definition, mm-hmm. An act of domestic terrorism need not be exclusively violent or involve firearms.
That is correct.
An act of hate, hateful language, that too is an act of terrorism, domestic terrorism.
The FBI on their website actually defines domestic terrorism as violent criminal act committed by individuals or a group to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influence, political, religious, social, racial, and environmental. And so that's where the FBI designates domestic terrorism. And so you are correct. It is a violent crime, but it is also a criminal act that can be done against another group of humans or human beings. And then again, we see it on the rise, and we also see a lack of data that depicts. So the FBI did do a hate crime report that we know that there was insufficient data because alongside when we look at police reform, those data collections are not being done correctly and they're not being utilized correctly. So we're not getting even the right data on who's being targeted around domestic terrorism.
We've been talking for years about data collection, and it still hasn't been done right. What is that about? I guess it's just that difficult because we have to rely on every individual policing agency, I guess, and a policing force. And I guess it's hard. There's no one place where all of those agencies can be held accountable.
Correct. And so, Reverend Mark, you hit it right on the head. When we look at policing across the nation, there is an executive order by the Biden administration that really calls for a universal understanding and data set. However, because policing is done differently in each state, whether it be state policing, whether it be local policing, whether it be sheriff, whether it be, it could be state patrol, all of those things fit under different categories and unfortunately different rules. Alongside, individual politicians vote either for or against these things, which also makes it more complex in each state. And so you're right, there is no universal system that exists. It's been an ongoing discussion and a push for us to collect clear and concise data, particularly to protect the rights of Black and Brown people across our nation. But it has not been utilized because a lot of what politicians are saying is we just don't have the infrastructure. We just don't have the ability to fund the infrastructure. In my opinion, Reverend Mark, I don't think that's the case. It's about accountability. They do not want clear and concise information being given out into our nation in order for us to hold accountable those discussions. And that's where the disconnect comes in.
And my audience knows this is my pet project, folks. You know, when policing is governed locally. All right. That's why when you're about to understand this, to change this, data collection is just one of the first steps. But if we're not, each and every one of us, involved locally, we're not going, a national tweet isn't going to stop your local police force.
Right.
All right. So what Keisha's trying to help us understand is, you know, and let's be real. And, you know, obviously I'm biased, but it's just a matter of fact, historical fact.
Right.
The NAACP is the only civil rights organization that has as many branches widespread with an infrastructure all over the country in most cities. So that's why we say, and I know this is what Keisha's doing, empowering the local branches to press and push in their locale. You know, I'd say to people, Keisha, Martin Luther King didn't come. If Martin Luther King came today, people, I'd probably tell them to start a national organization and get an Instagram account. Right? No, but they said, no, we're in Montgomery. We're going to deal in Montgomery. One thing, and you deal in one place and then it affects everywhere else. So this is important, folks, data collection. And again, Keisha, expound on just how significant, what a big difference. If we had data collection the way we should, what a big difference that would make.
Oh, Reverend Mark, it's a game changer, and I'll tell you why. Data is fact. It's scientific. There is no way to misconstrue data. There's no way to take data and push it towards an agenda. That's not the case. Data is factual. And so as we continue to see across the nation police brutality, the murders of innocent people by police not being held accountable, different jurisdictions, it causes an issue and continues to raise issues that we need to do better as a nation in holding accountable this structure, which, by the way, this structure was created in white supremacy, right? So policing was created to bounty hunt and to hold accountable the slaves that were running, and also for, you know, different slave action. And so this entire militarized structure and system is built on a very different concept of what we need. And I will say there's a difference. We need, as a nation, safe and healthy neighborhoods. we need opportunity to also feel safe. And if we don't have data that allows us to see why and how we do not feel safe, it continues to have a negative impact, not only from a generational trauma perspective, not only from a lack of accountability perspective, but we continue to have a divide in how our bipartisan agendas really need to be. So this is not a Republican or Democrat conversation. This is about creating safe and healthy neighborhoods for Black and brown people, which is a right. It is a right of how we sit in the way that we utilize our voting rights and in our country. So I would agree, data is everything. And I would also go further to say, when our Black and brown communities have the ability to vote, as you mentioned before, we need to vote, and we need to vote on agendas that are specific to how our outcomes are because of gun violence, because of police brutality, because of, domestic terrorism. If your politicians are not talking about that subject, they need to be.
Yeah. Of course, the NAACP supports the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Right. Also, the NAACP supports ending qualified immunity, correct? For police officers, right? So just that's on the police front, folks. But now, what about gun violence overall? What are some of the ideas that you have in terms of gun violence and gun reform?
Reverend Mark, I am a huge, huge proponent for having better gun control in this country. The NAACP understands that this is not just a conversation about domestic terrorism and police brutality. This is a conversation about interpersonal violence as well, and how we continue to circulate violence in our communities across the country. And so when we think about gun control, we think about three things that come top of mind. One is the ban of assault weapons. Anything with, magazines over 11 bullets, anything that have AR-15 or military grade weapons. In addition to that, we need to have better control. So I hear a lot that folks say, oh, well, it's never going to happen, but it's happening, right? There are some states, to your point, that are taking a stance on, I don't want these types of guns circulating on my streets. It's killing our people. The ability, it's not used for gaming. It's not used for sport. It is used to hurt and for terrorism. And so those things are what we stand for. The second thing is stand your ground. So we would like to ban stand your ground laws across the nation. That's something that is continued to target and racially profile Black people. And the third, which is universal background checks. And so we want to ensure that mental checks, universal background checks are something that can be held in a standard of gun control. But in addition, we're holding some of these gun shops and gun owners that have the ability to sell weapons in control as well. It should be monitored. Someone should not be able to walk into a gun shop and buy 11, 12, 15 AR-15s all at one shot. That doesn't even make common sense. Why and what would someone need that for? And so, yes, we are big. We stand very strong and are big proponents for gun control. We want to ensure that, again, this is a state conversation, that we mobilize our state leaders along with our political leaders to take action. And I know that we hear too, Reverend Mark, about, well, it's the protection of my family. It's the protection of my rights. That is not the case. Right. This is about the conversation of the circulation of the amount of guns in states that allow those guns to recirculate back on the streets. Those are killing people. They're killing innocent people. They're not doing the things that they think that the guns are doing. No, it's killing innocent people, killing children in our schools. It's killing innocent people in grocery stores. It's killing innocent people, in churches. We need to take a stance about gun control and ensure that we can fight for policies that protect people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, of course, too, there's the issue of corporate accountability, social media accountability, because that's what's helping to fan the flame of some of these white supremacist ideologies.
You are so spot on. And when you said media, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we have media platforms right now that do nothing but spew racial segregation. And so we need to hold those, both media organizations, and we need to hold those social media organizations accountable. I mean, the right to freedom of speech can only go so far until it actually hurts an individual. And so first thing I would say is, one, make sure that you have your back to data. Data is factual. It doesn't lie. And the second is that news can always sway a situation. But what we do understand is Black and brown people are being targeted in this country. And we need to hold those news outlets accountable to true, clear, and concise information. And so we can talk up against Twitter. We can hold Fox News accountable, right? They should be held accountable. Their standards of segregation should be held accountable. And so those are things that I would 100% on the forefront. And the NAACP and our president, Derek Johnson, has openly spoke up against these organizations that continue to spew hate and continue to perpetuate a negative narrative and target on Black people's backs. So that's the thing, right? It's this negative narrative that we have built in this country around what Black and brown people are, who we are, how we are, and the way that we should live in this country. That's not the case. We should have better dialogue and better narrative. So I'll give you a quick example of how many Black people didn't go to college. Well, why wouldn't we say the narrative is how many Black people did? So those are things that we need to shift and hold media accountable for.
Absolutely. It also, frankly, doesn't help when networks have hour-and-a-half town halls,
Right.
To give people an opportunity just to spew venom and make up things and attack women. There used to be some journalistic responsibility. I guess that's what's in jeopardy now. And
Right.
It's scary because it enables that type of behavior.
I think, Reverend Mark, when I got into this field of work and I was younger, I'll never forget the negative narrative they had pinned on Trayvon Martin, or the negative narrative they pinned on Breonna Taylor. These people were murdered. Their lives were taken at a young age. They had their whole lives ahead of them. But when we look at some of the dialogue, and I think this is a good thing for your viewers to really take note on, when we look at the dialogue of what white shooters are doing when they shoot up elementary schools or they shoot up high school, they had mental health issues. Well, they had a hard life. And so those are just great examples of how media can truly spin a negative narrative and continue to perpetuate targets on Black and brown people's.
Yeah.
And so that's something I think your viewers should just take note of in the future.
Absolutely. Folks, NAACP.org, you can see some of these recommendations on the website. They live there. Obviously, NAACP is continuing to do all of this great work. If you've not already, I know many of you already have, but join the NAACP and then meet us at the convention in Boston.
Yes, we're excited. We're excited about that, Reverend Mark. I hope to see you there. Absolutely.
Yes, I will be there. Count on it. Keisha, Dana Ryan here with us. Keisha, we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you too, Reverend Mark. I was very pleased to be on your show, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. As always, perform an act of kindness on behalf of an elder or young person. Write a letter to a sister or brother who just so happens to find her or himself incarcerated. Offer libations to the ancestors upon whose sturdy shoulders we all now stand. And above all, give thanks to the God of your understanding by whatever name you call her and him. All God asks of us is that we give each other love. Thanks for giving MIP love. And please remember to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.